Welcome back to part 2 of the Glowing in Tech podcast. Hi, I'm Amber.
And I'm Jessie.
And this is Glowing in Tech. Sponsored by Makers.
So today we are back with Candida for part 2, and we're going to be starting with a career challenge. So what's a career challenge that you faced, and how did you overcome that?
I'd gone into stuff that people thought that I should do, and I'd gone down, like you saying, the societal pressure and kind of, this is a proper job, right? And for me, it was also having stable income. I'd done sort of, I'd worked in Christmas factories, I'd worked in all sorts of arty things and catering and hospitality, all sorts of stuff. And I just wanted something that was a little bit more consistent and stable. And I think I didn't really know how to go about that in a creative way. I don't know if I didn't necessarily have that sort of experience, people with those experiences around me, but I didn't seek it out, I think. I've really learned that now, that actually there's so much you can seek out. And that was part of what I did. I got quite burnt out. I was quite tired. I was at a loss of like, right, what do I actually want to do? So I took a month off and I went to like loads of workshops and events and spoke to people. I discovered coaching by chance, and definitely recommend being cheeky and asking for chances. Being cheeky and just asking for chances, where you can. So like, this coach that I had a session with, she wasn't there for me. She was there for the students, but she was she had a quiet day. So then I just kind of was like, can I see what that's about? And that really, really helped. So I had all these options that I was considering, and I found that quite overwhelming. But my main thing was I want to do something I actually enjoy. And I think that part of the challenge was allowing myself to look for something I enjoyed, because I think I grew up with this thing of like, work needs to be hard.
Oh, interesting.
You shouldn't be able to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Something I want to touch on or ask about is a lot of the time it takes them a while to realize they're burnt out or they can't recognize it. So what were those things that you noticed about yourself that made you realize, hang on, this isn't normal. I think I'm burnt out. I think I need some time off. Because sometimes it can take people a long time to work that out. So what was it that led you to be able to make that decision for yourself?
It's a really good question, actually. I think I've got better at recognizing the signals for myself. But it was quite surreal because we had someone come into the organization who did a talk on mental health and looking out for your colleagues and burnout. And she went through these things and I was like, oh, I'm doing all of those things. So I kind of like realized that, so like, for example, there's little things like I just wasn't making as much, I'd gone quieter at work. I wasn't making as much effort with what I was wearing. I was just getting to work. I was on autopilot. My food, I was just eating crap, really, just because it wasn't focused. And I just felt quite down and upset at work. And actually, the coach who had coached me for that one session, when I first met her, I don't know, there's maybe like a month between her meeting me and me having a session. And afterwards, she said, your energy has completely changed. You've really gone down and you were quite bubbly like a month ago. And I think having someone else say that and reflect it back to me was like, oh, okay, this isn't just, because I think you're so right. When it's burnout, you feel like it could be just a phase.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just feeling a bit sad today. Maybe it's the hormones.
Yeah, exactly. We'll just see if it like shifts in a week or whatever. Exactly. And then you realize it's been a few months and you're like, oh, so I think everything kind of came at once. But it's definitely taught me my own signals of like, okay, if like I'm feeling really exhausted or if I'm making less effort with things that matter to me, something's shifting. Like what is that? So I think everyone has different patterns and it's getting to know them. But yeah, that was it kind of got to a point where I couldn't ignore it and pretend it wasn't happening anymore. I was like, okay, no, I just need to stop for a bit. So yeah, that's that for me.
Okay, so then you did these workshops, you kind of got in touch with how you were feeling and what it was that you enjoyed. And so now what do you do differently to maintain that kind of new energy that you have? Like how do you stop, I guess, that pattern from repeating?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think as someone that works a lot, I'm always prone to burning out. So,
I know the feeling.
glad to just saying. So, yeah. So I think I always have to watch it. I think I sort of go through phases of it. But again, I think in the same way that I got myself out of feeling stuck when I just was like, where do I go with my career? Or do I even, for me, I was like, do I even have a career as such? I've just gone from different job to job, right? I think it was, it's keeping the curiosity alive. I think if I realize I haven't done anything that I'm genuinely curious about, whether that is reading up on something, listening to amazing podcasts, having a conversation with someone that I'm really interested about something that, you know, we're talking about, is that inspiration that kind of wakes things up for me again. Whereas if I realize I've gone for a long time without any of that, that's when I think when it's not the only thing, but I think it's, again, makes it easier to start to slip.
Yeah. I really want to speak about even the external validation piece, about doing stuff like certain roles because of how other people view you, or because, this is what like I'm expected to do as an adult, as someone this age. I want to have a proper job because what is it going to look like if I have a creative role? I think that a lot of creatives do listen to this podcast and they may be struggling with similar things about them not feeling like they're good enough maybe because of what they do. How do you reframe that, like in terms of how it affects your self-esteem and self-worth?
That's such a good question. Ooh. I'm just like, there's so much I could say. So I think it's I'm really, really interested in learning around self-doubt and how that shows up for us and how it impacts us. And I think it takes a lot of courage and strength to change your career, or, you know, to go for something that is against maybe what your family and friends and society expects of you. You know, it's an energy that we have, but we have to keep tapping into, I think. And I took like a creative break for, I don't know, maybe like 4 or 5 years. And when I came back to it, it was like, this is my thing. Like, you know, whatever that was, where I was just making, or I was like, it's kind of like denying a part of yourself.
Yeah.
You know?
I feel this on a very deep level.
Yeah. And again, it kind of goes back to like, if you're denying that part of yourself and you're not living by your values and what's important to you, and, you know, our values can change from time to time. It's not that we have our set things, but that wears us down. Like, I think it naturally sort of opens a door to feeling a bit sort of down about things and our self-esteem going, and like not feeling as confident because we're not using our strengths. And I think if we know our strengths and we know, I just generally enjoy this, I'm generally good at this, it really, really makes a difference, you know, and that can be in work or out of work. It doesn't have to be as your career. I think as creatives, that's quite a hard thing when you think, how do I turn this into a career?
Yeah.
You know, and I've gone around in that cycle many times.
That's another thing with creative outlets, is sometimes you can putting the pressure on it being something that generates income or is something that you can rely on to provide resource, can be something that takes the joy out of something, right? So it doesn't always have to be a career move to tap into that creativity.
Complete. I really, really relate to that. I've, you know, I opened a craft shop and ran a craft shop. I was teaching book arts and creative workshops. I was making my own products and selling my own products. It's a lot, you know. It's exhausting. But I think one thing I have learned is that actually, what does creativity mean to you? Because yes, it can be making physical things, but it can also be being a creative thinker, right?
Sorry. I love that.
You know, so I think, where are you using creativity in your day-to-day life? And it's probably there more than you realize, you know, and kind of giving that some space and some credit as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's lovely.
That's lovely. So it is time for my favorite segment of the podcast, What's the Tech Tea? So Candida will be sharing her controversial take on something within the tech industry. So what will that be today?
So today it is around feedback.
Now spill the tea.
So I think I mentioned I'm quite fascinated really by overwhelm, self-doubt, and all that kind of comes in that under that umbrella. And because of that, I've been doing quite a lot of research into it. And some of my research, I found a study that was first conducted in 2014, and then they've repeated it, I think same or slightly or very similar in 2022, which found that in performance reviews, women got more negative feedback than men. But on top of that, 70% of women got feedback about their personalities compared to 2% of men. So yeah, I mean, that's just a shocking statistic, right? But I think if we kind of know this and we sort of prepare for it, I think as women in tech, it's really important to look at the sort of feedback you're getting and filter it, because it's not all going to be useful. And I go into this quite a lot in I recently launched a self-doubt course.
Did you?
Yes.
Okay,
It's about, we're exploring kind of just I think if you can develop a wise relationship with your self-doubt, you can use it to empower you rather than hold you back.
Love that.
And feedback is such a vulnerable thing, right? And it's always going to be. But I think, and there's different kinds of ways of looking at feedback in terms of the feedback we give to others, the feedback we're receiving. And when I say that, I don't mean just what someone's saying. I mean all the unsaid stuff, all the body language and the atmosphere and the tone. Again, studies show that women pick up on that a lot more than men in general, you know? So it's something that we're always taking in.
Yeah.
And that can be quite exhausting, you know? Exactly. But I think if we're filtering, if we know what our goals are and we are tapping into our inner resources and our inner support to really keep those goals in mind, then we can use that feedback to go, okay, what is useful about this to move me towards my goal? If this is just something about me as a person that maybe doesn't fit with isn't a good fit for the company, say it's a job rejection or something, or if it's a personality of somebody, or, you know, whatever that might be, there's so many other reasons that people give feedback and it says so much about them. Not necessarily a fact about you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what I like about the study that you mentioned was the fact that it actually talks about bias within feedback. I think that whenever we're speaking about feedback, we don't actually include the bias that's also at hand as well. What's interesting is even the conversation on the difference, essentially proximity bias about hybrid working, and you're more likely to feel a connection with people when you're in person rather than the people that are joining in virtually, and how that can impact your promotion, the way people view you and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky one as well, because people show up online so differently. You know? And how do you build an online space that welcomes introverts and extroverts and all in between, you know? I don't think it's the easiest thing. But yeah, I think it's a bit like, I think it's being really conscious of tone. And I think stepping back, and that's why I'm, again, kind of the journaling, the reflecting, so important, because with the sort of hybrid working, we're putting the tone on things a lot as well, you know? And that brings up all of these narratives and these stories that we have from past experiences. And some are true and that's what's happening. But like, you know, that there's so many layers that are on top of that. And I think really unpacking a piece of feedback and looking at what the facts are, how you feel and what you need are really, really key to structuring what you might give as feedback, but also what you might give yourself.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's really important. And the study and the statistics prove something that can be really difficult to prove, which is that there is a difference, because sometimes these things, being a woman in tech, being a Black woman in tech, you don't know, you can gaslight yourself and be like, am I imagining this? Is this actually what's happening? But understanding that you can take that kind of almost unconscious bias, because the people aren't necessarily doing it intentionally, but then filter it yourself to make sure that you are still receiving the benefits, but also kind of almost creating a barrier to prevent that kind of like thing that can wear you down and the way that you can end up not liking your job or your career because you are encountering these difficulties and these differences from the dominant groups in the industry. I think that's so key. So how would do you have any advice for like the things you would identify or ways you would identify feedback that isn't necessarily good for you or kind of beneficial for you to take on?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it's about looking at, my mind is thinking that I'm quite visual, so I'm thinking of like jotting this down on paper, right? So you've got some feedback, you're jotting down what was said. And I think it's really asking yourself, what does this tell me about the person who gave me the feedback? Rather than the perspective of what this is, because we may have a belief about ourselves and then it takes a tiny thing for us to go, oh yeah, that's what they meant, you know? So I think looking at what does this tell us about the perspective? And that doesn't have to be a negative thing. That can be kind of like, well, actually, maybe they're quite stressed. Maybe they've got lots going on. Maybe they had a short list of this many people and, whatever that may be. I know we don't always know the answers and some of that is guesswork. But I think it's a really interesting perspective to look at it from, like, where are they coming from? But then I would also look at what's in there. Yeah, like how much of it is about my performance and about something I can take on, and does that ring true? Can I change my learning way of working, whatever that might be? Is there need for that? Is it one person that said it once? Because that we get
weighted differently based on
I think a really good thing to consider, and it's a bit of a sort of bigger topic around it, but is what's feedback you've received that didn't sting, that you just went, oh yeah, whatever, no, I don't agree with you, I'm just not even going to take it on. And we do have those examples, and I think then it's kind of helps you identify what does sting and what does stay with you, and can kind of almost like put those punches in your self-esteem. Because then I'd say there's some inner work to kind of explore that, and you can start to reframe that for yourself. But it kind of, again, separates it from the person, the organization, your abilities, and kind of lets you see, oh, okay, it's because it kind of taps into something that might be a bit bigger.
I think what's a bit confusing though is like language. So for example, from the study, it was saying that ambition for men is seen as a good thing, but if they describe it as ambitious for women and minority groups, it's actually seen as a negative thing. And that's really confusing, because to me, being ambitious, that's amazing. Like, I would think that that's a good thing, but I would not know in the feedback, oh, Amber, you're quite ambitious, that they may not be seeing that as a positive thing. And that's what's so confusing, because we have different relationships with words. So I'm like, oh, thank you. I'm going to go over this section noticing. The actuality is like, you need to calm down. That's what they're saying. They say, but you need to calm down. Stop being so ambitious. So
I've definitely had that.
I have as well.
So maybe it's like also getting some clarity about like what they mean by things.
Very much so.
It's fair to ask. I don't know, because I wouldn't think to ask. That's the thing, because I'd be like, it's obvious, right? Like, we're in the same boat here, but we're not always in the same boat. So do you think that it's good to ask back exactly what they mean by that? I don't want to come across as abrasive and challenging. What do you mean by like, how do you balance that out in a helpful way?
It's a good
to make it not look like I'm being defensive, but also I need to know, girl.
You need to clarify.
And I think, but then that's it, right? And I think it's a really good point, actually. I think, yes, do ask, but it's how you frame that, right? So like, oh, ambitious. I'm really curious about that. I'd love to like understand it a bit more. How, in what sense do you mean it?
In what sense do you mean it? I'm writing that down.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us, Candida. Where can we keep up with you and find out about your course and all of that?
So there is my website, candidabradley.com. Nice and simple. And also I work at Makers. So if you want to reach out to me through that, it's candidamakers.tech. You're very welcome to. I'm really always happy to talk about all the kind of kind of how we understand ourselves and empower ourselves, and support others in that as well. Because I think once you have those skills, you can take yourself anywhere, really.
Thank you so much.
I love
We
that.
love that. Be sure to follow us on socials at Glowing in Tech on all social media platforms.
And let us know what you thought about the episode. Give us a 5 stars and comments on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you're listening to us. Thanks so much, and see you next week. Available on all major podcast platforms.